This is World Review with Ivo Dalder, our weekly look at news from around the world. This week, we have joining us Jane Perlez, the host of the fantastic podcast Face Off on the U.S.-China relationship. Jane, of course, longtime New York Times correspondent, including as her last stint Beijing bureau chief. And also joining us, Anton LaGuardia, the diplomatic editor of The Economist, also a longtime reporter, now in Washington and before that in Brussels. We're going to talk about Ukraine, but we'll start off on the U.S.-China relationship. The President of the United States is, as we speak, taking off from Andrews Air Force Base to Asia, his first trip in the second term to Asia, and where he announced the other day he will have a meeting with Xi Jinping. And that is, besides all the other things that the president's going to do, that's, of course, the one thing most people are going to be watching. So, Jane, you know this relationship as well as anybody. You have studied it. You have looked at it. You have written about it. You have talked about it and podcasted about it. If you have to sort of characterize where are we today in that relationship, and what can we expect in the next few weeks, particularly with regard to the meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump?
Well, to take your last point first, Ivo, I think we should look at this meeting in the context of the past meetings, which is these two men first met at Mar-a-Lago, if you remember, on Trump's home ground. And I always think of these meetings of having a sort of kind of iconic emblem to them. And that was the chocolate cake meeting where Xi Jinping was eating chocolate cake and Trump mildly announces, "Oh, I've just bombed Syria." Then the next meeting was in the Forbidden City. I always think of it as the Forbidden City meeting, where Xi gave Trump a great tour of all the gold statues, and he fell in love with Beijing immediately because of all the gold. I mean, it was very smart planning by the Chinese. They last met in 2019 in Japan at a sort of low-key thing at APEC. And so this is the first time they've met since 2019. And things have dramatically changed, of course. I think Xi Jinping comes into this meeting really fortified by a big meeting in Beijing this week, the fourth plenum as it's known, gathering of all the top dogs of the Communist Party. And, he fired 8 generals just like that, just purge of the PLA. So that shows his power, I think, and his strength. And they issued an economic report in which they doubled down on China's tech strength, China's overall strength, but did nothing about their very weak domestic economy, meaning, poor consumption. And we forget that 900 million Chinese get by on about $10 a day. So it's not exactly the economic titan that we are thinking about it as today as Trump goes into this thing, with facing a big barrage from Xi Jinping, the big rare earth restraints, constrictions, bans, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, no, so it's a fascinating sort of, and I'm glad, Jane, you put this in a sort of a historical context, because I think over the last almost 10 years now, from the first to the meeting to this one, the power dynamic, Anton, seems to have shifted from one where clearly the United States was in charge, underscored by the Mar-a-Lago, the chocolate cake, and, oh, by the way, I just bombed Syria dynamic, to this one, which clearly is a meeting that the President of the United States wanted and really sought and almost was willing to do almost everything else to get it. And that suggests a different power dynamic. So how should we look at that when they actually sit down and they start negotiating about the issues?
Well, I think Donald Trump, came back into office believing that the world needs America and it doesn't need the world. And I think it's discovering that that was true in the case of a lot of countries, especially allies that need America's protection. But it's not true in the case of China, which has withstood the trade pressure and is probably actually winning the trade war, given the sort of back and forth that we've seen from the administration. I mean, on the tariffs, they escalated wildly, then de-escalated, and now on the trade regulations, especially on rare earths and other minerals that Jane mentioned, the Chinese really do have seem to have a sort of, chokehold on the American economy. And that's, I think, very uncomfortable for Donald Trump. I'm not sure he was expecting that. And, I mean, if you just think about it, the US has restrictions on a certain kind of chip going into China. The Chinese have a grip on the rare earth minerals that go into those chips. So America can't make those chips without Chinese rare earths. And the kind of proportion of rare earths that are processed in China is, of the order of 90% of the world's total processing. So the Chinese really have this lockdown. It will take years, even with a sort of concerted effort by Western countries to try and diversify sources, not only of mining, but of refining of rare earths. And until then, the Chinese have a real advantage. And they've applied some of the American methods requiring licensing. So now all companies that buy Chinese rare earths have to submit even pictures of their factories to tell the Chinese exactly what they're doing and how they're using them. So the China, this is sort of, a transformation, Copernican transformation in the way trade is done.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, Jane. I think Anton, besides the phrase "America," which I will quote, I won't steal it, but I will quote it. This wonderful phrase that Trump thought the world needed America, but America didn't need the world. I think that's a great phrase, by the way. But this transformational way of thinking that in many ways the Chinese learned from the United States how to weaponize interdependence.
Well, so much so, I just want to point out on the rare earths, if I can.
Yeah.
It's incredible. My colleague, Keith Bradshaw, who's in Beijing for the New York Times, pointed out to me a couple of days ago that not only have they put a chokehold on any exports of the rare minerals themselves, but they put a chokehold on the equipment that you mine the rare earths with. So, for example, the US just did a deal with Australia. A lot of, we're great, we're going to get the rare earths out of Australia. But if Australia can't get the equipment to get the rare earths out of the ground, where are they going to be?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, and I think what we are learning, and we probably should have learned, and you as a close observer, Jane, of the Chinese scene probably knew this. But the Chinese have been doing this very deliberately for a very long time. There's a quote in the Wall Street Journal the other day that I hadn't seen before from Deng Xiaoping in 1991, in which he said, "The Middle East has oil, China has critical materials." That's a stunning sort of thinking about the strategic way in which the Chinese from day one thought about economic development as a means to gain power and not to become sort of like American capitalist rich and just for rich sake. They want to be rich to be powerful. And now we are paying the price for having ignored that. Is that the right way to think about it?
Oh, I think it is. I mean, the Chinese take the long, long view. I mean, I don't want to get into a discussion about Taiwan right now, but they're going to take the long view, a longish view on Taiwan, unless, of course, they're provoked ridiculously. But, the long view on everything, I think. And they're being more patient than some people think in the South China Sea, for example. They're going hard up against the Philippines, but then they just stop short of being totally provocative, totally terrible. So I think they're very well ordered. And by the way, I don't mean to sound, a triumphalist about American democracy, but they don't have to worry about such things as elections, about, the rule of law, about courts. It's just a completely different society. So if the top dog decides I'm going to do this, if he's well organized, like Xi seems to be, and if he's got loyalists around him, they can just go for it.
God, that sounds familiar to today's American democracy in some way. But let's not go there, Anton. You actually have spent a lot of time in the Indo-Pacific, looking at not only at Taiwan and the South China Sea, and I do want to. I think Taiwan is important because there is this question that I think hangs above everyone when Trump and Xi meet. Will Taiwan become the sacrificial lamb for Trump to get his, greatest deal ever, i.e., farmers, his soybean farmers being able to sell back to China again? How worried should Taiwan be that that's the kind of game that she is playing and that Trump is more than willing to be part of?
I think they have good reason to worry. Donald Trump, unlike I think most previous presidents, has placed short-term economic tactical gains ahead of strategic questions and of great power competition. So he sees it as a very sort of transactional thing. Will I be able to sell more soya beans? Will I, and so on and so forth. So you can perfectly imagine that Donald Trump would make concessions on declaratory language about Taiwan, which at the moment, long established American policies that America that America does not support Taiwanese independence, to changing it mildly to what the Chinese want, which is to say that the United States opposes Taiwanese independence. In Donald Trump's mind, words don't really matter very much. And so I can perfectly imagine that he would trade them away. Obviously, if you're Taiwanese, you're very worried because that is a gain that China has made. And it also allows the whole Chinese lawfare sort of strangulation strategy around Taiwan to gather strength and become more powerful and more convincing to countries around the world. And it's not just the Taiwanese, obviously. The Japanese worry about where America is going strategically. He doesn't like alliances very much. He tends to see allies as a burden rather than an asset. So generally, there's great trepidation about where America is going. Things seem to have stabilized with the Europeans, having got NATO to spend more on defense. We really don't know where Trump is on the big strategic questions in the Indo-Pacific.
No, I think that's right, and he is, of course, going to Japan, which has a new prime minister. Just a preview. We're going to talk about that next week in more detail. But I imagine that the Japanese are wondering about how is the rapprochement between, if there is a rapprochement between China and the United States, what is that going to mean for their alliances? So of course the Taiwanese and so the South Koreans, and indeed the Australians, for that matter. Jane, do you see this as something that the Chinese are playing very actively to try to divide the United States from its allies by making a bilateral deals that in strategic terms don't matter, like buying soybeans or TikTok? I mean, frankly, those are not big strategic things. Giving up rare earth processing probably is strategic in order to change the dynamic of America's relations with its allies and partners in
Oh,
the
I think
Pacific.
that's been the case forever, but they've just got more to play with now. So with Australia's sort of torn because there are a lot of questions in Australia about Donald Trump, obviously. He's not the most favorite American politician, to put it mildly. At the same time, there's a lot of skepticism about China, even though they are Australia's biggest trading partner. A lot of skepticism because of a lot of cyber attacks, a lot of espionage, attempts at espionage. So I think the allies in Asia Pacific, as Anton mentioned, are looking around and are very concerned. It'll be interesting to see what the new Japanese prime minister has to say with Trump. It'll be interesting, the dynamic. I mean, I just don't imagine Donald Trump with a Japanese woman prime minister. It's hard for me to visualize. So it'll be very interesting to see.
The choreography is going to be great. Before we get out, one sort of twist to the conversation I'd love to get both of your senses on, and Anton, starting with you, is so we've really kind of painted a picture in the last 10, 15 minutes of China being the top dog and certainly becoming more powerful, but in many ways having the U.S. number. At the same time, and Jane, you hinted at that, the domestic economic situation inside China, not only the fact that you have 900 million people living on $10 a day, which is not, there are some poor people in the United States, but it's not that bad, and certainly not those numbers. And that the economic problems and the demographic, the very rapidly aging country that exists, that are we in the danger of overestimating Chinese power and staying power, and in some ways believing that a 2 feet, a 6 foot tall person is in fact 10 feet tall? Is that a danger that we're running, or should we not be complacent about this? Anton, what's your sense?
I think both. I mean, I think, yes, the Chinese are not, supermen, and they have their own problems. At the same time, the U.S. is struggling to have a consistent and long-term policy to deal with China. We've got a, ADHD administration that really struggles to kind of focus on anything for more than a week, as we'll discuss in the case of Ukraine. So it's a real problem. America has innate strengths, one of which is its alliances, which it's busy trashing. The other thing is its economy, which is busy trashing through tariffs. So yes, if America plays its cards right, there's no reason it shouldn't be able to constrain China, but it's not playing its cards very well at the moment.
So we've seen we've found our enemy, and it is us. In some ways, Jane, how do you see the strength of the long term strength of China?
Well, I think there's some very interesting things going on domestically in China. I would point to one major thing. There's about 20% unemployment among the under 25-year-olds. That's massive. And a friend of mine who watches this very closely says that this Generation Z in China are getting more and more disaffected. As he put it, the kindling is getting dry. And I said to him, actually in an upcoming episode of our podcast, if I may say, launching on November 11th, I put to him, is this subgroup, 20% unemployed, a threat to the regime? And I was quite surprised. He said, yes, it could be. Because there are a lot of people, highly educated people in this group who can't get the jobs that they want, the jobs that they were educated for, and they're going off and, the smarter ones, I guess, are going off and launching coffee shops or home bars or whatever. But that's only going to last for so long. And I think one of the disturbing things from the domestic economy point of view, and Anton would know more about this than I, that this latest big Communist Party meeting in Beijing didn't address this question. They talked about, boosting forevermore their tech strength, but didn't do anything about the failing domestic consumption and the situation with people at home.
Yeah, no, I think that that was noteworthy, and also the fact that not that many people showed up for the meeting. It was I think, it was the worst attended plenary meeting since the Cultural Revolution, which is pretty remarkable. So a lot of things to watch, and great to put that all on the table in the last 15 minutes or so. Let's go to our second big topic, related in some ways to this one. Ukraine. Anton, I've described this as the roller coaster. You never know whether you're up or down. The hope is that you stay on track. And when it comes to Ukraine and the relationship with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and Mr. Zelensky, to President Zelensky in the middle of it, where are we today? Are we finally at the point that sanctions are real and the United States has turned and tried and decided to join its allies in pressuring Russia, or is this just one loop in many?
Well, it's 11:32 in the morning, so at the moment, it seems that the ratchet has turned, and that these sanctions are for real. It's taken a very zigzag route to get here. I was at the Anchorage summit in August when Donald Trump rolled out the red carpet and embraced and applauded Vladimir Putin and got nothing for it. I was at the UN in September when he was talking tough and saying Ukraine could win. And now we're in October. And then, when Zelensky was coming here last week, as you'll remember, he seemed to be on the point of selling Tomahawk missiles and then got a phone call from Putin and then seemed to change his mind completely, saying, actually, Ukraine can't win and it will be destroyed if it keeps fighting. And no, I'm not going to provide Tomahawks, and I'm going to see my friend Vladimir in Budapest, of all places. And then in the past few days, he's flipped again. And now they have imposed sanctions on the two biggest oil companies, Russian oil companies, which the Biden administration had not done. So that is significant. And the price of oil has increased as a result of it. It's not clear yet what enforcement will be like. It's not clear whether they'll be able to get at some of the smaller Chinese refiners who do most of the buying of Russian oil. And it's also not clear how much further Trump is willing to go and how quickly he might soften his position if he got another phone call from Vladimir Putin saying, by the way, I really do want peace. You just don't understand what I mean by peace.
No, I think that's exactly all those question marks at the end are I think, given the history, is probably the right one. I think the biggest question mark, Jane, is this issue of will he, in order this really to work, the Chinese are the ones who need to stop buying Russian oil, and the Indians. And the Indians are sort of trying to figure out how they can play this game. Of course, the Indians never bought Russian oil until it became very, very cheap, so they could make a lot of money on it. But the Chinese, they play a different game. And so I guess the question is, one, will the Chinese stop buying Russian oil? Number two, will the United States put the pressure on the Chinese in order to try to convince them to stop buying Russian oil?
Look, I wouldn't count on the Chinese stopping buying Russian oil. I just really wouldn't count on it. I saw something yesterday that the refineries in China have stopped for the moment for buying while they quote unquote assess. Well, I'm not quite sure. There may not be a formal assessment, but I bet that the result of the assessment will that the Chinese will continue to buy Russian oil one way or another. Look, I think we have to remember that Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, said, you'll remember better when he said it than I, Ivo, he said, we don't want Russia to be defeated in Ukraine. And that's the bottom line. And so I just don't see them doing anything dramatic.
And Anton, how serious do you think Trump would take a Chinese rejection when at the same time he's trying to get the big great deal? Do you think he's going to put Russian oil on the table in the discussions with Xi?
I think to some extent, but I think he's more interested in soybeans than in Russian purchases of oil. Not least because I think the Chinese always want diversification, and they don't want to rely entirely on the Middle East. And they've got this big petrostate to their north that is, willing to provide lots of oil and gas. So I'm sure they will want to continue to buy Russian oil over and beyond the point that Jane made, which is they don't want a Russian defeat. I think they also have greater means to make it happen in that they can, they have a whole series, as I understand it, of smaller refiners that never touch the American banking system and therefore are not subject to sanctions. Or can't be got at by American sanctions. So, I think they will have, two tiers. They'll have, globally trading Chinese refiners that will, may stop buying Russian oil, and then they'll have lots of domestic refiners that will keep buying it, and that will just be the case. Now, I think the real question is, does that put a dent on Russian revenues, which is, does it lower the price at which Russia has to sell what oil it can? And the evidence so far has been that, Western sanctions and pressure have somewhat reduced the price of Russian oil. They've had to sell it at a discount to the Indians, as you mentioned, Ivo. And maybe this will put further downward pressure on the price of Russian oil. But at the moment, global prices are going up.
Yeah, global prices are going up. I mean, the Russian oil revenue was already down a third in this year compared to last year, about 135 billion last year to about 100 billion expected this year, which is a big drop. And the interesting thing about oil prices, they haven't gone up as much as one would have expected if the market actually thought that this was going to happen, that Russian oil was not going to be on the market. 5-6 million barrels a day, I think is what it is. That's a significant amount of money. Jane, I think you want to pick up on a point that Anton also raised and you raised, which is the Chinese don't want Russia to lose. And one piece of evidence is of course buying this oil. But the other piece, and you and I were talking about this yesterday, was the degree to which China has been absolutely critical to Russia's war machine and its ability to continue to fight this war. You've looked into this. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, obviously, Russia's drone capacity in Ukraine has increased dramatically in the last 18 months or 2 years, and it's been a big factor in their ability on the battlefield. And those drone factories in Russia are being supplied by China. There's no way to get around it. And some people have done some amazing reporting on this. Reuters had a really excellent story about how Chinese drone engineers were visiting Kupol, a big Russian drone factory, and they even had the flights on which the Chinese guys had gone on to go to the factory. They had it down cold. And then a Ukrainian defense NGO did some amazing work on engines from a certain Chinese engine factory going to Russian munitions factories or military factories, and these engines being put into the drones. And so I asked Joe Bohr, who is a retired senior general in the PLA, about this the other day. And he's a guy who's sort of allowed by the regime to talk. He said, "Oh, this is all just dual use. You can't prove that's going into drones." Well, excuse me. I don't think that's very convincing. So the short story is, I think that China has helped enormously with the drone capacity.
Anton, I know the economists look at this as well. Significant reporting on the degree of help. So, if you had to sitting where we sit today, first time since in the 9 months that the president of the United States has put real pressure, or at least has announced real pressure on Russia. The kind of continued assistance that the Chinese are providing to Russia. How much do you think all of this matters when it comes to the question of whether Russia will continue to fight this war until such time that they have achieved what it is that they said they want to achieve, which is to address, quote, the root causes, which is Ukrainian independence and its ability to decide for its own future? Does this make a big difference, or in the end, that's not how this war is going to end?
There are great unknowns in this war, which is that we don't know what degree of social pain Russians will take before, resentment turns against Vladimir Putin. Maybe he himself doesn't know that, but my impression is that he's willing to inflict a lot of discomfort on the Russian population. A big question will be: does he need to do another mobilization and start to call up the young men from the cities, which are the main power base of the regime? I think that where America stands is important, not because it means that Ukraine is going to win, but also because it means Ukraine will not lose. In other words, Russia will not achieve the aim, even the minimal aim of taking the Donbass. And at which point, given the rate of attrition that they're suffering, they might decide that it's time to stop and agree to a ceasefire in place at the least. The evidence that the Economist has done some very interesting data reporting and mining, which is suggesting that the Russians are suffering about 3 or 4 times the Ukrainian casualty rates at the front because of this very intense electronic and drone warfare along the front lines. They're just losing an awful lot of people for minimal or incremental gains. If that holds and there's no sudden collapse on the Ukrainian side, then perhaps next year Putin will decide, okay, I'm not getting very far, and this is starting to cost me too much, and I better come to terms. And a crucial player in that equation is, where does America stand, and how much support is it willing to provide? The other unknown dimension is, how much are European voters willing to put up with the expense of having to help Ukraine? And the other thing is, we don't know how deep the military stocks are in America. Even if they're selling instead of giving away weapons, does America have the stocks that Ukraine requires to be able to hold the line? And we have this debate over Tomahawks, which are quite few and far between, and it applies to other weapons as well.
I think that's a really terrific summary of where things stand, both the uncertainty with regard to the domestic situation inside Russia. Remember that 15,000 people killed over 10 years was sufficient to change the dynamic in the Soviet Union with regard to Afghanistan. We're at well over 1 million casualties in 4 years. And at some point, you do have to ask the question, how sustainable is that? And at the same time, all these other questions about how the Ukrainians will be able to continue that fight. It's all there. And the Chinese will of course, play a role. This has been a terrific conversation. Jane Perlez, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
Anton, same to you. Always great to have you. Jane, you're going to be a regular. We're going to bring you back. It's fun to have you on this, and I want to thank everybody for joining this week's World Review. We'll be back next week with another series. And until then, have a great weekend.
Thank you, Ivo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.